Should I be like this with a spiritual guide? If it were just about not knowing, then Satan would have been the greatest spiritual guide. Just look at the state he fell into, even though he was the chief of the angels. That's a different quality altogether. Look at the words of Imam Azam. He says, if it weren't for just the last 2 years of my life, Numan would have been ruined. That Sultan says one day to Ibrahim, touch me. When he greeted himself, he addressed him as my master, he says. His students were amazed, he says. How can someone as learned as you? I call Ibrahim my master when I touch him. When they asked him that, look at the answer he gave. He is occupied with his Lord. We, on the other hand, are occupied with his words. You know, Mustahdim had a very beautiful saying when they asked what the difference is between scholars and saints. He says, scholars inherited the knowledge of our Prophet. Saints inherited his actions. In other words, scholars know what he knew, but there is no practice. Saints live as he did. What is the point of knowing if you can't live it?
Look at how beautiful the words of Haji Bayram Mirli are about envy. There he says, Numan, my dear, you have no idea about the truth. You have no idea at all. He says, are you just carrying your knowledge on your back like a pack saddle? In other words, are you just repeating his words? Is it your Lord who is pleased with you? He basically compares the scholar, forgive me, to a donkey. A pack saddle is a donkey's burden. Can you imagine that? So what is the truth then? He says again, to Hazrat Sonunchu Baba, who has a blind friend living in a forest house. He says, he takes him, my child, Numan, my dear. He says, you are at the edge of the spring, and the spring here refers to Hazrat Sonunchu Baba. He says, you are among those who remain thirsty at the edge of the spring. Look at that, just look. So it truly doesn't matter how much knowledge you possess or how extensively you understand things. If merely knowing information was sufficient for success and wisdom, then even the devil with all his vast and profound understanding would undoubtedly be considered the greatest scholar of all time. He had memorized the 4 holy books for 1500 years. Not just 1500, he says, he had 750,000 years of worship. His knowledge even became his practice. So what good did it do him then? It's about placing it in a beautiful heart. It's about reaching that pure, clear heart. It's about reaching that crystal clear heart. But that jewel, that heart, can only be entrusted to a jeweler. In other words, to a true master of the craft. Because you don't know how it should be handled. You don't know how it should be refined. At what temperature it needs to be heated, for example. At what temperature it needs to be cooled. Why? Alright. It's the first time you've ever held a jewel in your hand. Isn't that right? Just think about a carpenter who shapes wood. If you said, it's just wood, I can do it too, how would that turn out? If you sat down at the machine at the workbench, even though it's just wood, you wouldn't be able to do anything. Even though it's just wood, you can't do anything with it. So how would we handle a jewel? In our hands, it would be no different than a piece of glass. But in the hands of a master, even a madrasa teacher who has become an embodiment of arrogance can be transformed into a sultan like Hazrat Achubai Rama Veliye. Once it falls into the hands of a master. Exactly. The same way, that's how our Sultan emerged. They say, teacher, people like that don't come out of the military, so how did you manage it? Who is that? Again, it is the revered Sonunchu Baba, who is also known as a spiritual guide, who lovingly and carefully raised Haji Bayram Veli. His real name is Sheikh Hamid Veli. He was the spiritual guide of our Sultan. He surrendered himself to his spiritual presence. He personally assigned him to KAYSERİ. He is from here.